Hi, and welcome into another edition of the Russell Street Report. I'm Tony Lombardi here on Fanimal Radio. The Ravens advanced to 7-5 on the season after an impressive 26-16 victory in Atlanta over the Falcons. That win, coupled with the Steelers' loss to the Los Angeles Chargers, puts them one half game behind the Steelers in the race for the AFC North title. The Ravens are using a formula that has worked for them in the past, most notably in 2000 and 2008, and that formula is run the football, control the clock, manage field position, protect the football, and keep it away from opponents. And so far, it's working for the Ravens with Lamar Jackson behind center. Now, a couple of key stats in the game against the Atlanta Falcons, and these are mind-boggling, folks. 366 net yards of offense for the Ravens compared to 131 for the high-flying act that is the Atlanta Falcons. Very impressive. And that is courtesy of, really, 77 offensive plays for the Ravens, 45 for the Falcons. Time of possession in the game, 39-39 for the Ravens to 20-21 for the Falcons. In the second half, it was amazing. I believe they only ran 10 plays, the Atlanta Falcons, in the second half, and possessed the ball just 5 minutes and 55 seconds as compared to the Ravens, 24 minutes and 5 seconds. The Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco debate rages on. We'll talk about that during the program. And also, right after the break, we'll be joined by Eric Eager. He covers the Kansas City Chiefs for Pro Football Focus, who really which has become a standard in the NFL for sports analytics. We'll talk to Eric. We'll also be joined later in the program by Cliff Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com. And to wrap things up, we'll be joined by Lynn Worthy. He covers the Chief for the Kansas City Star. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this short timeout. And welcome back to the Russell Street Report. I'm Tony Lombardi. Joining us now from Pro Football Focus, he covers the Kansas City Chiefs for PFF. His name is Eric Eager. Eric, welcome into the program.
Hey, how's it going? How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Things are good here. It's been a fun NFL season so far, very unpredictable in many ways, so it kind of makes it exciting.
It does, and that's pretty much how the NFL wants it these days, to be unpredictable, parity, and all those good things. So yeah, definitely an interesting season so far. Let's talk about Pro Football Focus first, because it's interesting to me how seemingly overnight, I know you guys probably don't think of it that way because you work there, but it seems like almost overnight it has become a standard for analytics in the NFL. Talk about the company, talk about how it's changed since Chris Collinsworth's involvement, and what do you see the future for Pro Football Focus?
Yeah, so I think, interestingly, I think it gets the analytics tag, but early on it was very much just scouting football differently, so for a long time, coaches would always grade their players on a scale, and that was the first thing that PFF did, was grade players on a scale from -2 to 2, and basically trying to say, what kind of block did this left guard make? What kind of, how did this inside linebacker take on, this offensive lineman in space, all that kind of stuff. And over time, what we've been able to do is make it into numerical, scores for players, ratings for teams, trying to predict, who will win the upcoming game, sort of more difficult, but, and over time it's grown and since Chris bought the company, I think it's been pretty accelerated. So, prior to PFF, I was a math professor, and I had played football before, but I was mostly just a math nerd. And over the course of the last, 3, 4, 5 years, he's brought me on, a few other people on, to really take a deep dive into what these numbers mean about football and how can we use them to better understand the game.
So if our viewers are interested in finding out how to get involved with PFF, how do they do that?
Yeah, so it's a couple different ways. So when we're, in the off season, we're always trying to train people in some of our data collection activities. So we chart basically anything you can think of with respect to football. But, I would say for somebody in my role, it's mostly, learning as much math and statistics as you can while still trying to understand the game. I would say, even though I played all through college and I kept an interest in football even since I stopped playing, just knowing mathematics and having this rich data set at my disposal has really helped me understand what wins football games more so than 21 years of playing the game could even tell me.
So Eric, let's get right to it. The Chiefs host the 7-5 Baltimore Ravens at Arrowhead Stadium on Sunday. The Chiefs are 10-2. Their only two losses were both shootouts versus the New England Patriots. I think it was 43-40. The Patriots won, and then of course the Monday night game in L.A. where the Rams beat the Chiefs 54-51. The only time a team's ever scored 50 points or more in an NFL game and lost. So big shootouts. This past week, they went to Oakland, played the Raiders, and they won 40-33. Talk about that game. It was the first game the Chiefs had, I think, since Kareem Hunt has been suspended and since they've released him. Talk about that game and what you saw when the Chiefs played the Raiders.
Yeah, and not only without Hunt, difficulty in the sense that they had game planned the entire week to have Hunt as their running back, and then Friday the news came. So even though I think Spencer Ware and Damian Williams played fine, they were certainly not playing in a game plan that was suited for them. It's interesting when we're talking about the Ravens, because the running game is so integral to what they do, but running the football at the NFL level is, I would say, like a tertiary variable at best. In terms of winning football games. So while Kareem Hunt was great, he still leads all running backs in broken tackles forced, even after not playing this week. The downgrade from him to Spencer Ware is not necessarily substantial. And as we saw on Sunday, it's overcome by what Patrick Mahomes can do as a sort of brilliant quarterback so far. Travis Kelce, their tight ends on Sunday, Kelce being chief among them, generated over 200 yards in the passing game. And then, Tyreek Hill only had one catch. He had a nice run, but he only had one catch, and they still were able to put up 40. So despite losing Hunt, I think that their offense is, varied in the way that they can attack you. And I don't foresee Kareem Hunt really moving the needle necessarily in terms of their win total or their probability of winning the Super Bowl. It's nice to have a player like that, but ultimately, running backs, except for a very few of them, are kind of a dime a dozen.
That's interesting you would say that, because I looked at Kareem Hunt as a multifaceted guy, a guy who really puts pressure on a defense, and then in turn that frees up some space for guys like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce.
No, and I think that is, I think running backs that can catch the ball for sure are going to be ones that I think add more value. And we're not saying he's not valuable. We're just saying that if you go down to somebody like Spencer Ware, who, is also kind of a low round draft pick like Kareem Hunt, you lose about a quarter of a win over the course of 16 games. So it means something. But if you were to lose Patrick Mahomes or Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill, somebody like that, it would be worth substantially more. So, if the Chiefs were to lose one of their superstar players, it's weird to say, but Kareem Hunt is probably the most advantageous for them to lose.
Travis Kelce presents matchup problems for just about every team he faces. And when you look at the Ravens and some of their, what I call the soft white underbelly for the team, they struggle to cover tight ends. Now, I know that's pretty common across the league, but Kelce arguably is the best tight end in the NFL right now. Talk about him a little bit, the special qualities he brings to the Kansas City Chiefs offense. And from your experience, what have opponents done when they've been successful, at least to contain him?
Yeah, he's I think the only tight end aside from Greg Olsen to have 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. He might end up setting the record for yards receiving by a tight end. Interestingly, he was a very effective player even when the Chiefs had a more limited guy in Alex Smith at quarterback. And I think that showing what he can do under Mahomes really highlights his value. Under Smith, he ran a lot of bubble screens, and he led the NFL in yards per catch after the catch among tight ends for the 4 of his first 5 years. He's second this year, but mostly because he's been able to go downfield more. And I think that he's very effective there. Honestly, teams that can shut him down, I think, need to have a safety who is sort of that multifaceted player who can cover in the slot, who can is big enough to handle him. His size and things like that. And I think the Ravens sort of struggle there because their 2 safeties are sort of more, that box. Jefferson's more of sort of a deeper guy. Weddle's kind of a box guy. None of those guys really play in the slot too much. And so if you put a corner on Kelce, it's going to be tough just because he's too big to physically handle. And if you put a safety on him that's not used to covering, wide receivers in space, then, Kelce presents such a mismatch. So I do think that's one place where, the Chiefs really do have an edge in this one.
Well, then someone's going to have to tell Kelce that it's a 4:00 game.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's been a very nice player for the Chiefs, and he's had his moments of getting personal foul penalties and things like that. I think this year he's really abated that. So he's a superstar for sure.
You are a math major. You've played the game. You're now working for Pro Football Focus. Andy Reid said something pretty interesting, at least through Chris Collinsworth on one of the Sunday Night Football broadcasts. He said that no team in today's NFL will lose games due to their inability to stop the run. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I may or may not have given Chris that message myself, but okay. It's one of those where if you look at what correlates to winning football games, it's passing the football is first, stopping the pass is secondary, running the football is actually third. It's quite a bit down the list, and the least important variable of those four is stopping the run. If you look at last season, of the 9 teams that had allowed the worst yards per carry, 7 made the playoffs and 8 had winning records. The Chargers were third in points allowed, and they gave up the most yards per carry on the ground. So, we've seen that, I think, a little bit in Baltimore, right? They've had whether it was Ray Rice or Justin Forsett or Alex Collins, or now you have Gus Edwards, the Baltimore Ravens have been very effective on the ground in recent years, and that hasn't translated to wins, playoff appearances and things like that. Running the football is one of those things you do when you're ahead, and stopping the run is something that you do when you're behind. There are things that you don't actually do to get ahead or to get behind, and that's I think why the Chiefs have been poor against the run almost the entire Andy Reid era, and they continue to churn out 9, 10, 11, 12 win seasons. And I think it's one of those little hacks that, some of the teams have figured out and not put resources in. And some of the teams, I think, are overspending.
The Ravens are almost flipping that script recently because in the last 3 games with Lamar Jackson as the starter, they've run for over 200 yards in each of those games. And it seems like time of possession has been key to the Ravens' wins. They've had so many more plays. I think they had 77 plays against the Atlanta Falcons versus 45. In the second half, Eric, they possessed the ball 24 minutes and 5 seconds to the Falcons 5 minutes and 55 seconds. So those are crazy numbers, and it's working so far, but it's worked against teams that have struggled to defend the run. Talk about that approach versus the Kansas City Chiefs.
That's great. I think the number that I heard was the Falcons had something like 10 second half offensive snaps or something, and really hard to get anything done when you don't perform there. It is something. So, one of the things we have found in the running game's favor is that quarterback designed runs are one of the more effective plays in football. And we've seen that with Carolina. Cam Newton is not the most efficient passer in the world, but where he does add a ton of value is running the football on designed plays. Lamar Jackson so far this year, he's averaging 6.9 yards per carry on designed runs to the left. He's averaging 7 yards per carry on designed runs to the right. On scrambles, he's averaging 6 yards per carry. I mean, you take out some inside runs and kneel downs and stuff is where you get where he is, but he's terrific. And I think what that does is it adds value. A traditional handoff to the running back on average in the NFL gets you further away from scoring than throwing the football almost for every team, no matter how bad the passer is. Designed quarterback runs get you closer to scoring, especially when the guy is as good at it as Lamar Jackson. So I do think you can throw some of those statistics, the heuristics out of the window when you are that good there. The issue that Chiefs opponents have had, and some of this is noise, but some of this is real, is that the Chiefs generally start the game pretty good defensively, and they almost always score on their first possession. The calculus is going to be a little bit different for the Ravens if they're behind 7-0 to a Chiefs team that they probably know can score 35 than if they're, the last few games they've been out ahead of the Bengals. They've been out ahead of Oakland, and then last week Atlanta, they kind of controlled that entire game. It'll be interesting to see, if they get behind against the Chiefs, if they continue to try to run the football, because the Chiefs are very soft there. They play a lot of sub packages. Their defensive linemen are more gap shooters than they are block eaters and so forth. So I wonder about game flow if I'm handicapping this game in terms of how well the Ravens are going to do with their improved rushing attack.
It will be interesting to see how that high-flying offense does against the Ravens' number one ranked defense. So knowing what you know about the Kansas City Chiefs, let's talk about offensively and defensively. What's the Achilles heel on each side of the football? And if you are the Ravens, knowing what you know about the Kansas City Chiefs, how do you attack them on both sides of the football?
Yeah, offensively, it's pretty small. I mean, they have issues in the interior of their offensive line. I think Cameron Irving, a former first-round pick of the Browns, is currently their left guard. Against the Rams didn't do much defensively against the Chiefs. What they did do is create a few turnovers by getting interior pressure on the interior of the Chiefs offensive line. Their right guard is currently on IR, designated for return. So the Ravens have historically had great front sevens, and I think that they could possibly, steal a few drives here and there by getting sacks. Mahomes has been great under pressure this year. He's been great when holding the ball for a long time. So the Ravens will have to cover, which will be tough, I think, because I think the Chiefs secondary receivers are pretty good as well. For me, I think you have to get pressure on Mahomes. You have to, stop early down passing plays because, he's just so effective. He can do, basically anything on third and short and things like that. So there's not a ton of weaknesses with them offensively. Defensively, it's all over the place. I mean, they struggle stopping the run. Their linebackers are pretty poor in coverage. So I know Gus Edwards doesn't have the reputation necessarily, but I think Buck Allen could have, if he's healthy, could have a good game catching the ball out of the backfield against Anthony Hitchens and Reggie Ragland. And at the corner position, I think that they're a little weak. I know the Ravens aren't great at receiver, but they have been able to stretch the field at times this year. So, the Chiefs' entire defense is their weakness of their team. And it just amounts to how accurate Lamar Jackson can be when they ask him to throw.
So how do you see this playing out on Sunday?
Yeah, I think the spread for the game is 7. I would be surprised if it deviates too far from that number. Arrowhead's a tough place to play, especially in December. It's actually easier in January in the playoffs historically. But I would say that the Chiefs win by anything between 4 and 11.
You're on the fence there, Eric.
Well, it's tough. It's a big game, so I'd be a little bit different in my approach if the Chargers did not win Sunday night. I think the Chargers continuing to put pressure on the Chiefs will keep the Chiefs playing, foot to the ground here, and I think when they do, it's a pretty potent team.
It really is, and San Diego's I'm still calling them San Diego, Eric. Los Angeles Chargers. I don't think I'm alone in that category, though, but the Chargers certainly are playing good football and certainly keeping the pressure on the Chiefs to win. So thanks for joining us from Pro Football Focus. Anything you'd like to tell our listeners and viewers about Pro Football Focus?
Yeah, so we have some cool stuff at PFF. We have I host a podcast called the PFF Forecast. So when you're done listening to this, listen to this podcast first, obviously, but when you're done with that, give us a listen. We're on iTunes. We're on Podcast One. Basically, we're trying to break down every single game using our analytical tools. And a lot of the stuff I talked about today is the focus when we talk about, sort of handicapping every game. So a lot of fun, and we're doing some cool things at PFF, so just check us out.
There he is, Eric Eager. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. Happy holidays to you and yours.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a short time out. When we come back, we'll be joined by Cliff Brown from the Baltimore Ravens. Don't go away.
Like 33rd Street was to Colt fans, Russell Street will become legendary for future generations of Raven fans. Not only is Russell Street the team's address on Sunday, it's now home to the website voted Baltimore's best 5 years in a row. You've known them as Ravens247.com for years, and now you'll love them as RussellStreetReport.com for many more. There's nothing else like it for Baltimore football fans. Trust me, RussellStreetReport.com. Baltimore's home for football 24/7.
And welcome back into the Russell Street Report. I'm Tony Lombardi. Joining us now via the Mobile One hotline from the Baltimore Ravens is Cliff Brown. Cliff, welcome into Russell Street Report. How are you?
I'm fine, Tony. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Hey, my pleasure. I'm good. Hey, Cliff, I got to ask you, from the Ravens' castle, and from my position from afar, I'm looking at this Lamar Jackson versus Joe Flacco as almost like a political divide. It seems like you've got the Democrats and the Republicans, and you've got those wanting Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco, and there's no in between. What's going on out there?
I don't think it's that bad, Tony. As far as the team is concerned, I think that winning is obviously the bottom line.
Absolutely.
So that I think that has to be kept in perspective and should be kept in perspective with fans as well. I mean, obviously, there's going to be debate about the quarterback. It's the most important position, and you've got two guys who have such contrasting styles. But right now, as we speak today, the bottom line is the Ravens have won 3 straight games and have a chance to get in the playoffs and even win the AFC North, something that didn't seem really in the conversation when they entered the bye at 4-5. So winning's the bottom line no matter who's on the field. And right now, I think the Ravens feel much better to be now than they did 3 weeks ago.
Now, when you look at Joe Flacco on the sidelines, now Joe's never been an excitable guy to begin with, even when he's playing. He looks like, everybody's always said the deer in the headlights. But this past Sunday, when the Ravens were down in Atlanta, Joe looked really uninterested. And I'm just wondering, being in the building, do you see a different Joe Flacco now that he's not playing? Or is he the same guy off the field? We just kind of read into it too much from afar.
Yeah, I think, it's unfair to read into what Joe's thinking until we hear from Joe. We haven't heard from Joe. Media hasn't heard from him since his injury. Now, I'm sure, people close to him, obviously he's talking to them. And Joe has never been shy about speaking for himself. So I think that when we do hear from Joe, he'll be candid about, his feelings since he's been hurt and his feelings now. But, Joe has always been a team guy. He's been here his whole career. I'm sure he's happy that the Ravens have won the last 3 games. And I'm sure that when he's healthy, he's going to want to play. So, that's true for any player. And I think that, it is obviously remains to be seen what's going to be happening moving forward. But, I wouldn't get caught up into how he looks, what he's doing. No, I think that would be unfair to him.
With respect to Lamar Jackson, it seems like there's a new energy with the Ravens, and I think that's evident on the sidelines. The guys are just really getting into the game. They seem to be ecstatic after they beat the Atlanta Falcons on the road. Talk about that a little bit, and talk about the excitement that Lamar's presence has injected into the team.
I mean, there's no question he's a dynamic player. That touchdown run he had against Atlanta Sunday, I don't think there's any other quarterback in the NFL who scores on that play. Just a combination of speed and agility he has. And I think that another thing, I think people are talking about it more, but that is not being talked about enough is how much the Ravens can control or have controlled the football the last 3 games with their offense. I mean, they had 39 minutes of time possession against Atlanta. When your defense, and they do have a good defense, only has to play 21 minutes on the clock, that has a huge impact on how they can perform as well. So, it hasn't been just Lamar. It's been the effect on the running game. Obviously, the way Gus Edwards has run the last 3 weeks. The whole look and identity of the Ravens offense has changed over the last few weeks, and it has changed successfully. And certainly, Cincinnati, Oakland, and even Atlanta are not 3 of the top-tier teams in the NFL, but we're about to get a look at, how they're going to do against one of the top teams in the NFL, which is the Kansas City Chiefs. And if you can control the football against anybody, it doesn't matter how good the other team's offense is. I've never seen, Patrick Mahomes or Phillip Rivers or any quarterback throw a touchdown pass from the bench. And that's where the Ravens offense is keeping the opponent's offense on the bench.
Yeah, the players are different, but the formula seems to be the same as that formula that the Ravens used back in 2000 when they had that stretch run, Cliff, where they just possessed the football, they wore down opposing defenses, they tried to play mistake-free football, and that's certainly something the Ravens could clean up from this past week against Atlanta. But, it's a formula that's worked in the past, and maybe it's going to work going forward.
I think that's an excellent point, Tony. It worked in 2008 when Joe Flacco was a rookie quarterback.
That's true, too.
I mean, a running game is always a quarterback's best friend, particularly for a young quarterback. And, yeah, I mean, obviously Lamar, needs to develop as a quarterback. We have a 3-game sample window of him as a starter. So this is not the beginning. This is the beginning, not the end of whatever he's going to be as a quarterback. But certainly the running game helps him. Obviously, he's a part of that running game. But there isn't a pressure on Lamar Jackson right now to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Ravens can win without him doing that. Now, again, he has to develop as a passer and he has to develop as a pocket passer. But, yeah, he doesn't have to come in. If they're going to continue to run the football like this, he does not have to come in and throw for, 300, 350 yards. So the fact that his passing numbers don't look as good as, Joe's would or other quarterbacks isn't really as relevant as long as they can run the football the way they have been.
We're speaking with Cliff Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com on the Mobile One hotline. Cliff, talking about the passing game and Lamar Jackson's, I guess that you could call them shortcomings right now. He's a work in progress. There was a play against the Falcons where he overthrew John Brown, who was wide open. He probably overthrew him by like 8 to 10 yards. Do you think that as this plays out and the running game becomes more and more a part of who the Ravens are, and they de-emphasize passing, particularly when they're in the lead, do you think there's a chance that there might be some discontent amongst the receiving corps?
Well, if he continues to miss guys who are wide open on a regular basis, certainly that could happen. But I think that, what's going on is players know that, as you mentioned, he is a work in progress. And I think that at this point, they're willing to live with, some of the overthrows or misthrows because it's offset by what he's giving them on other plays. He is making some good throws. Frankly, the receivers have to help him out when he does make good throws. I mean, he also had a couple of drops Sunday that hurt the Ravens. So, yeah, Sunday, I think, was his most, quote-unquote, shaky game as a quarterback. You can't put the ball on the ground 3 times in 1.5. Yes, he did miss some open throws. But I don't think his throwing has been, a disaster because he's made good throws mixed in with the bad throws. I mean, he made some excellent throws in all 3 games mixed in with some throws that he should have made. So, again, that's something that you hope becomes more consistent as he gains more and more experience, as he gets more and more reps, as he's in more and more game action. Everybody knows it's one thing to throw, footballs on the sidelines, to throw footballs in practice. In game situations, that's the ultimate test. And, yeah, I think Lamar Jackson has, made some good throws. And you also will see, experienced quarterbacks like Ben Roethlisberger. I've seen him the last 2 weeks miss guys for touchdowns wide open as well. It's going to happen. Lamar's getting scrutinized, incredibly because of the situation he's in. But, again, the bottom line is, to me, he's still making way more winning plays than bad plays, and the record so far shows that.
We're speaking with Cliff Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com on the Mobile One hotline. Cliff, Lamar Jackson was quick to point out that he gave a lot of credit to his offensive line in this game against the Atlanta Falcons. And when I look at the Ravens' offensive line, I even think back to 2017 with all their injuries that they had. They were able to gel as an offensive line and as a unit and actually have a really good season in 2017. 2018 got off to a kind of a sloppy start, but all of a sudden you're starting to see this offensive line gel a little bit better. Talk about that unit and what you've seen so far from the coaching staff with the Baltimore Ravens regarding the offensive line.
Yeah, I think with most teams, the running game is usually, if it's going to be good, usually can get better later in the season. I mean, training camp and the preseason just isn't enough time for offensive lines, for the most part, other than playing together for a while, to really gel the way they can late in the season if guys stay healthy. But certainly this year, there have been some definite, positives for the Ravens that have helped the offensive line become really good. Obviously having Marshall Yanda healthy again is a huge key. the insertion of Orlando Brown Jr. as a starting right tackle, and what he's brought, his physicality, I think has been really important. I think Ronnie Stanley at left tackle has probably had his best season, even playing, through an ankle injury. He's been really solid. I mean, how many times have you seen, a Ravens quarterback getting pressure from the blind side? Not many. So, and even, Matt Skura has done better as a center than I think a lot of people thought he was going to do. And I think this change to a power running style, the read option, what they're doing now, helps the offensive line. I mean, they know they can fire off now and just go after people on these running plays. Lamar's presence is making linebackers hesitate, and just that little hesitation sets up so many more blocks than before. And, they're playing with a lot of confidence now. The Ravens, again, they have an identity now. That they know they can run the football. They believe they can run the football against anybody, and that sets you up to have good offensive line play. And then even when they do pass, because they're not in obvious passing situations as much, that helps them keep these pass rushers away from the quarterback as well.
Speaking of offensive line play and speaking of players that are really coming on, Marlon Humphrey, there's a guy playing with a lot of confidence, Cliff, a guy that's really bringing his game. And I got to admit, I'll raise my hand if I'm asked, who do I prefer, Marlon Humphrey or O.J. Howard, on the clock for the Ravens in the first round of 2017 draft. Talk about Marlon Humphrey and how he's really stepping up his game.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, he is really on the verge, I think, of becoming, one of the best corners in the NFL if he continues his trend moving forward in the next year. And the Ravens, their cornerback unit now, it's been a long time to me since they had, 4 deep corners. When you have Marlon, now you have Jimmy Smith, who the last couple of weeks has also played a high level. After his return, Brandon Carey, Mr. Steady over there, and Tavon Young, who's a really good slot corner. I mean, that's 4 guys they can put out there and don't feel bad about whatever matchup another team tries to throw at them. So that allows them to do so many more things, cover opposing offenses in so many more ways. They're not only getting sacks when, guys up front are beating the man in front of them, they're getting coverage sacks now because these quarterbacks are having to hold the ball longer than they want to because the coverage is so good. So, Marlon, going into his own has been a huge key, but all those guys are helped by playing with each other. I mean, Marlon, Jimmy, Brandon, Tavon, they're all holding up their end. So, again, that allows Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator, to do so many more things because he feels very confident those corners are not going to give up big plays.
The one guy missing from that defensive secondary, Cliff, is Derwin James. The Ravens had an opportunity to take him, but they moved back in the draft. They ended up taking Hayden Hurst. Talk about Hurst so far, because when you look at the 2 young tight ends that the Ravens have, clearly the most productive has been Mark Andrews.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that, as the number 1 pick, Hurst was the guy expected to be, the most dynamic player at the tight end position, and that hasn't happened for him yet. Mark Andrews has played extremely well, I think, as a rookie, and has given them a boost. And obviously, Nick Boyle's a heck of a blocker, which becomes even more important now that they've gone to the style offense that they've had. Max Williams, he's had his moments as well. Hurst, he seems like he really got thrown off by, that foot injury he had in the preseason. During training camp, he looked terrific. Every practice, he was, flashing. But since he's been hurt and has returned, it has been more of a struggle for him. So, the Ravens have to hope that, as happens with a lot of rookies, that he'll get his feet wet and shake it off. I think it's way too soon to say that Hurst is not going to be the player the Ravens expected him to be. He very well may be that and more, but obviously it's going to take some more time. But at least they have, if Hurst doesn't blossom this year and start making more plays, it's not like they don't have another alternative at tight end to go to because of the way Andrews has stepped up and because of the way Boyle is playing.
Now I have to ask this question, Cliff. The Ravens advance to the playoffs. Let's assume that they do. Joe Flacco's healthy. The matchups are such that Joe should play. Do you think that they'd be bold enough to shift gears and hand the ball back to Joe Flacco?
Well, there's so many hypotheticals that could go forward. I wouldn't rule out anything, and I don't like to give riding the fence answers, but I wouldn't look for something as dramatic as, say, if Lamar starts the rest of the way and goes into the playoffs with the starter. I wouldn't think that he'd be on a quote unquote short leash situation that if he had a bad quarter or a bad half that they would turn to Joe, but you just never know. I mean, it's not like the Ravens cannot win with either. You can win games with Joe Flacco. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been an MVP of a Super Bowl. He's won multiple playoff games on the road. He's won in places like Pittsburgh and Kansas City and New England in playoff games. So you can win with Joe Flacco. It's a much smaller sample size of Lamar, but obviously you can win NFL football games with Lamar Jackson as your starting quarterback. So I just think that, Coach Harbaugh has handled this in a way that week to week we're going to try and put the best team forward on the field that gives us a chance to win. The last 3 weeks has been Lamar. I would think at this point, indications are that it certainly could continue to be Lamar moving forward, but I don't think that John feels that you can't win with any of the three quarterbacks he has. And if he feels that at a particular situation that this guy needs to play or that guy, then that's the move he's going to make, because I don't think he's afraid to do whatever he thinks needs to be done for the Ravens to win.
Speaking with Cliff Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com. Last question for you, Cliff. It's sort of a two-parter. Do the Ravens make the playoffs, and do they win the AFC North?
Well, I hope the answer is yes and yes. I think they do make the playoffs. I like the way they're playing now. Obviously, the schedule, everybody knew the schedule was going to be tough going down the stretch. I think the win Sunday was big. Atlanta, even though they haven't had the season that they wanted to, they're still not an easy team to beat in Atlanta, and they have a great offense. So that was a big win. This is a real tough game, obviously, coming up in Kansas City, one of the toughest places to play. If the Ravens win Sunday, I'll really feel great about the chances of them making the playoffs. And even if they don't, I think the Ravens, what we're seeing now with their running game and certainly with their defense, is not a mirage, and that they will play well enough to make the playoffs. As far as winning the division, I think that's more in the Steelers' hands than it is the Ravens. I mean, they still have the edge with that half-game lead. They have a tough stretch. People always want to throw dirt on the Steelers, and to me, that's when they come out and play some of their best football. So if they bounce out of their funk right now, I still think they have the edge to win the division. But if they don't, I think the Ravens are going to push them hard. And I think it's probably going to come down to the last week. And obviously it would be great for the Ravens not only to get into the playoffs, but to win the division. And 2.5 weeks ago, when they were 4-5, it was hard to see them winning the division. Now they've got a real shot.
There he is, Cliff Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com. Cliff, thanks so much for joining us today.
Anytime, Tony, man. Be good.
All right, take care. Okay, we're going to take a quick time out. When we return here on the Russell Street Report, we'll be joined by Lynn Worthy from the Kansas City Star. Don't go away. Hi, and welcome back into the Russell Street Report. I'm Tony Lombardi. Joining us now on the Mobile One hotline, he works for the Kansas City Star. He covers the Kansas City Chiefs for the Kansas City Star. His name is Lynn Worthy. Lynn, welcome into the program. How are you today?
Thanks. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So big news coming out of Kansas City as it relates to the Chiefs. Hakeem Hunt suspended, and now he's cleared waivers and now is a free agent. Talk about that impact on the team, Lynn, if you could, in terms of how it may affect the team on the field, if at all, or if it's affected the team at all in the locker room.
Well, I think having played a game this past weekend, I think with the timing, it definitely affected emotionally the team because, Friday, pretty much that's the day when the hay's in the barn. You already got your game plan set and everybody's just sort of getting ready to get on the road. And then you find out that, Kareem Hunt, who's a guy who led the NFL in rushing last year, who's I think it produced well over 1,000 yards of total offense this season between rushing and receiving. And an energy guy, a guy who we saw a lot of the highlights that went viral this year, whether it's him hurdling guys and things like that. All of a sudden, you take him out of the equation, not just, an injury, but he's gone for good now. So I think that hit some guys emotionally, and obviously they as all football guys say, next man up and you push forward. Mm-hmm. But I keep thinking back to earlier this season, he had stood in front of his locker after a game talking about, him and Mahomes being in the same draft class, being guys who had the conversation as rookies about how they wanted to take over the Chiefs kingdom, as they like to call it out here. And now all of a sudden, he's gone.
Has it affected Mahomes at all?
I think he hasn't really let it show. Obviously he talked about, that they were close, and he still talked to him after the team released him. But he's going to go out and play. I think, even a game that was a little bit of a rough start against Oakland, he still had 4 touchdowns, didn't commit a turnover, just shy of 300 yards passing. So, I'm sure it affected him mentally, emotionally, but he still went out there and performed and made plays. And when I say made plays, I mean stuff that wasn't just, throwing open guys, but had to make things happen. He did that. So I think the interesting thing, or one of the interesting things on the football field, will be how they adjust and how this offense has to adapt a little bit without him in there, and how they sort of make use of the strengths of the running backs that they will have on the field.
Here in Baltimore, there was a similar incident with Ray Rice a few years back. And, Ray Rice explained to the team what went down. The team didn't see visual evidence. And then when visual evidence surfaced, everything changed. It was almost as if the Ravens didn't want to pursue that visual evidence, Lynn, and they never really, you would think that given the resources of a team and the NFL, that they could dig in a little bit more. But sure enough, TMZ did the digging for them and turned up the video, just as they did with Hakeem Hunt. Do you think it's a situation, because I blame the Ravens a little bit for not digging into that with Ray Rice a little bit more, but do you think it's a situation in Kansas City that they really didn't want to find out what Hakeem Hunt did back in February?
Well, everything that we've found, that we've been told through our reporting here, has been that the Chiefs, they, as soon as the incident, or they were aware of the incident, they sat down, they got in touch with him and talked to him about what happened. Obviously, there were police reports that were available. And then as far as the video, what we've been told was they were pursuing the video, and then were told by the league to stop, because the league was, the procedure is the league handles that. So you sort of try and eliminate, at least in theory, bias from the team. And so the league was the one who was, handling the investigation and told them to stop pursuing the video. So, and I think the fact that the release, them releasing Kareem was, clearly they stated the fact that he was untruthful with them was the impetus for the release, because clearly, they thought that they knew what was going on. As far as they knew, the league had investigating or wasn't investigating, and they didn't think anything was going to come from this. For the owner, Clark Hunt, to sit out there in training camp and say that, they felt like it was more of a thing where he just had to be more careful about who he was around to make better decisions, and that he was going to make better decisions, and they didn't expect discipline from the league. I think they felt like they had an understanding of what had gone on, and the league was handling it. So for this to come out, I think it really hit them off guard. And I don't think it was because they didn't want to know. I think it was because they thought they had a feel for what had happened and that things were going on, were taken care of by the league.
So maybe it's a question of the league not wanting to know, and maybe that was the case with Ray Rice, and maybe it was the case with Reuben Foster, who finds a job with the Washington Redskins, claimed off waivers. Do you think Hakeem Hunt ever finds another job? Considering how young he is, he did clear waivers, but considering, he's 23 years old, he's a guy who's not, going to have a high price tag. He's a skilled guy. Just as far as from a football standpoint, obviously, there's no defending his actions.
But I think it's probably almost like almost a 10-year difference between where he was at in his career and Ray Rice was. So that makes me think that somebody at some point will probably take a chance on him. There's definitely going to be a suspension, though, and you don't know how long that's going to be because there's that incident. There's starting to be come light some other incidents that the league will have to look into, and then the fact that he wasn't truthful. Because if you look at the NFL's conduct policy, just by not being truthful, that gives them leeway to add more disciplinary action on top of whatever he's got for the incident. So I think somebody takes a chance on him. I think there's going to be a suspension, and I don't know if it's one of those things where you maybe don't see him for a year and then he surfaces somewhere.
All right, Lynn, let's take it back to the field. Let's look at that Raiders game. The Chiefs go into Oakland. They win 40-33 despite the Kareem Hunt hangover. Talk about that game a little bit. Do you think that was a game that the Chiefs maybe coasted through it a little bit, expecting to really take it to the Chiefs? Because I think they were 16-point road favorites heading into Oakland. Or do you think it was a question of the Raiders just playing better than the Chiefs thought they would?
I think it was more the Raiders playing better than you probably would have expected, just by looking at their record and what they've done this season. I think there was, clearly some of it was different personnel because of, the Chiefs not having, obviously, Kareem Hunt, not having Sammy Watkins, who was out with an injury. And the Raiders did a good job defending Tyreek Hill, who's, been one of the top receivers in the NFL this season. So the Chiefs had to lean a lot on that Mahomes, Travis Kelce connection. Kelce had a career day and really carried them. It was funny because around here we were talking about the game just seemed offensively like the Chiefs struggled and were disjointed and out of sync and however else you want to say it. And they scored 40 points on the road. So I think going forward, you expect that offense to get back clicking once they get time to game plan with the running backs that will be in there, Spencer Ware and Damian Williams. And then also, ideally Sammy Watkins comes back in the next week or two. So I think the offense will pick back up. It was just one of those weeks where, they were still working through some things and also coming off the bye week. So there might have been some rust there too.
Lynn, we know that Andy Reid has his way with quarterbacks, that he's an offensive genius, and that he can really get the best out of his quarterbacks. Did you ever think that Patrick Mahomes would be as good as he is?
I wasn't sure how good he would be, but I definitely didn't think he would be this good this soon. So, just before the season started, I remember talking to somebody and saying, by the end of the season, I think he'll be, hitting his stride and be doing pretty well. And they were sort of shocked. They're like, oh, it's by the end of the season. And I was like, well, kid's played one game. How good do you expect him to be right out the gate? And then he comes out the gate and is about as good as anybody has ever been coming out of the gate. So I didn't see that coming. And, and the thing that really stands out is, or a couple of things that stand out is, one, his ability to make plays off script, whether it's, that left-handed pass from the Monday Night Football game or the touchdown pass where it seems like he covered every inch from sideline to sideline before throwing it to Chris Conley in the corner of the end zone. That, and then, there's the arm strength. And then the other thing is just when, he seems to be able to bounce back. He's had games where he's had tough stretches, tough halves. The New England game, they were down. He threw 2 first-half interceptions, and then he comes back, and he's, and they couldn't stop him in the second half. And if not for a field goal on the last play of the game, that's a tie game. He's been pretty unique, pretty special. He's still obviously early in his career, but he's the fastest guy in NFL history to 4,000 yards passing. So he's doing a lot right now.
On the other side of the football, the Chiefs have had some struggles on defense and against the Oakland Raiders. After a miserable game against the Ravens in Baltimore, Derek Carr had a passer rating of 123.2, and then the rushing attack, which was then the 23rd ranked in the league, they run for 171 yards. Talk about the Chiefs' defense as it stands today.
Yeah, the main thing with the defense, I think, has been just it hasn't been consistent enough. There's been times where they've been able to hold up pretty well against the run, and then times when it seems like they can't stop teams. They've had stretches where they've held teams to it was a couple games back before the Rams game, they'd held about 3 or 4 teams in a row to I think it was 20 points or less, or right in that ballpark. So they were holding their own, but then the Rams game obviously is 54 points. And some of those were offensive touchdowns or touchdowns that were given up by the offense to the opposing defense. But it's been a lack of consistency. They're starting to get some guys back. Eric Berry could be back. Eric Berry could be back this week. That's still not for certain, but they expect to get him back somewhere in the next couple of weeks. Dan Sorensen was a guy that missed the first, I think it was 8 games of the season. So they've got some talent. It's just a matter of consistently being able to play as a unit. I mean, this last game against Oakland sort of demonstrated that, where they had shut down Oakland throughout the first half. Oakland puts together a drive at the end of the half, scores a touchdown, and then in the second half, Oakland scored on all but one possession, either touchdowns or field goals. So it's a matter of putting it together, I think, for them.
Lynn, you mentioned earlier Travis Kelce. What do you do to stop this guy besides tying his hands and his arms together?
Well, you've got to devote multiple people to him. I mean, that's one of the things that the Chiefs have really thrived on this year, is making you make tough decisions on how to cover people. Because you got Tyreek Hill, who's probably the fastest guy in the NFL, and then you got Kelce, who's been a mismatch for safeties, linebackers, and corners all season. So you've got to devote multiple people to him. Or if you just had sort of a unique guy who you feel like can match up with him, then try your luck that way. But, I mean, he's one of those guys who just is a problem because of his size at 6'5", and I think they list him around 260. He's got speed and quickness, and he does a lot of damage after the catch. So he's a guy who catches it, and he's not just you get it to his hands and he's going to fall down right there. You're going to just be able to get him down easily. We've seen him this year make cuts and go past defensive backs. So, I mean, it's a challenge. It's something that, it's one of those things that sets him apart. Plus, I've heard opposing coaches say you have to basically treat him like a big wide receiver, not just because of his skill set, but because how they line him up all over the field.
Right, and you mentioned before he's a mismatch sometimes for corners as well. And it made me think of when the Denver Broncos, when they had Aqib Talib and they played the New England Patriots, they would match up Talib against Gronk. And it seemed to work out in certain situations. Has anyone done that with Kelce so far this season?
I think that, the Patriots game I don't think he had as great a game. And I know one of the things they did there was, they did devote multiple people, but they tried to make sure that they jammed him a lot at the line of scrimmage to keep him from getting, clean releases. And I think that was one of the things to just sort of throw timing off. And I think he even mentioned, I think maybe it was the week after, about how, he got bumped just about every play that he tried to get off the line of scrimmage. And now, obviously, the Chiefs can move him around and sort of help with their release. But I don't know that there's been a matchup where, they've just devoted one guy to him and been able to sort of live with that. I think the teams that have tried to do that have sort of suffered the consequences. And obviously he's coming off a game where he had a career high with 12 receptions, 168 yards, I believe it was. So he counted for more than half of their catches and more than half of their receiving yards.
Filling NFL stadiums has been a problem for teams across the league, and you see it every time you turn on the TV, except when you turn on a game that includes the Kansas City Chiefs playing at Arrowhead Stadium. Talk about that home field advantage at Arrowhead.
Yeah, I mean, they like to claim about how it's been recorded as the loudest place, one of the loudest places in the NFL. And this year, I think with the excitement of Mahomes, because, it's been, 30 plus years since they actually had a quarterback that they drafted in the first round who's been their guy. I think that alone, the excitement behind just having a quarterback they call their own, the fact that they were coming off a successful season last year, not successful in the playoffs, but, overall, and the fact that they felt like they had weapons. I mean, you knew that they had Tyreek Hill, they had Travis Kelce, they signed Sammy Watkins, Kareem Hunt, who obviously isn't there anymore, but was coming off a rushing title. I think there was a lot of that. And then they start their first 2 games on the road, 2 big wins. Mahomes starts to build momentum. So once they first got here and played a game, I mean, it was one of those. It was one of those days where you could barely get into the parking lot. I think it took almost an hour just to sort of navigate through there to get into the stadium pregame. So yeah, I think the fact that and the fan base here is obviously a big has been behind the Chiefs for a long time. I think there's a sense of the excitement that Mahomes brings, that there's a sense that, you know, they could have something special this season. So games at home, this has been a tough environment for teams to come into.
So this Sunday, the Ravens face Kansas City as 7.5-point underdogs. The over-under in the game is 53. Do you see a situation, or could you envision a situation where the Ravens could steal a win in Arrowhead?
To me, it's going to be about the tempo of the game. So whoever controls sort of the tempo or the pace, if the Ravens are able to control the ball, keep Mahomes and the offense off of the field, make it sort of a low-scoring or lower-scoring game, I think that bodes in their favor. But if the Chiefs get up at home and make the Ravens have to play catch-up, I'm not sure how that goes for the Ravens, just because, you know, I mean, whether it's Flacco or Lamar Jackson, the fact that they have to play catch up with Mahomes and keep pace with that offense is a challenge, first of all. And then second of all, the Chiefs, despite, you know, giving up as many yards as they have, they've got some guys who can get off after the passer. Whether that's Dee Ford, who, you know, has 10.5 sacks, is amongst the top 10 pass rushers in the league in terms of sacks. I think Pro Football Focus has him as the top edge rusher in the NFL so far in terms of pressures. Chris Jones is another guy who's in the top 10 in sacks in the NFL. And then Justin Houston's missed a few games this year, but he's back healthy now, and he's a guy who's proven pass rusher off the edge too. So I think the tempo of the game is going to decide the outcome in a large part.
So, Linworthy, what's going to happen? Who wins the game?
Well, I'm going to have to. I guess I'll have to stick with the Chiefs. I think the last time I picked against them was the first game of the season, and I looked like a fool. So I've just sort of gone with them the rest of the way. You know, because you say, they're not going to pull this one off, and then Mahomes comes out there and, you know, was the talk of the NFL, and he's sort of been the talk of the NFL ever since. So, you know, with that offense playing at home, it's hard to pick against them. I haven't really thought of a score, but I guess I'd probably give the Chiefs probably a 2-touchdown edge at home. But, you know, I'm not necessarily real good on the predicting.
Nor am I. I've predicted against the Ravens last week. I'm predicting that the Chiefs win this one 31-20. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to be an interesting game nonetheless.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. I mean, one of the top defenses statistically in the NFL against one of the top offenses. So if nothing else, that matchup will be interesting to see how it plays out.
So there he is. Linworthy covers the Chiefs for the Kansas City Star. Lynn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for the Russell Street Report today on Fanimal Radio. Special thanks to Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, Cliff Brown from BaltimoreRavens.com, and Linworthy from the Kansas City Star. Be sure to subscribe to Fanimal Radio on iTunes and YouTube. You can check us out on FanimalRadio.com as well. On behalf of all of us at Russell Street Report, thanks for tuning in, and please join us again next week when we recap the Ravens at the Kansas City Chiefs. Have a great week, everyone.